Hello and welcome to the second webinar in our third series of Encore webinars. These webinars are sponsored by the Schlegel UW Research Institute for Aging and Conrad Grebel University College in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, and the Centre for Aging and Pastoral Studies in Australia. My name is Jane Kipfer, and I'm in Waterloo, and my co-host is Sally Mordyke in Australia. Feel free to pop in the chat where you're joining from if you would like to do that. These webinars have their origins in the 10th International Conference on Aging and Spirituality that was held in June 2023 here in Waterloo. They are providing us, as people interested in spirituality and aging, with opportunity to keep learning and to stay connected around the world in this time between conferences. We are so glad that you could join us. And yes, we are recording, and you'll be sent a link to access the video, the chat, and the PowerPoint slides. So today we have Reverend Professor Elizabeth MacKinlay, AM, joining us to talk about considering our own aging, spiritual journeys, transcendence, and frailty in later life. Elizabeth MacKinlay is a registered nurse and an Anglican priest. She's director of the Centre for Aging and Pastoral Studies at St. Mark's National Theological Centre, Canberra, and a professor in the School of Theology, Charles Sturt University. Elizabeth was chair of the ACT Ministerial Advisory Council on Aging in 2008 and was the ACT's Senior Australian of the Year for 2009. And Liz is a member of the Order of Australia. So welcome, Liz. You were part of the ICAS 2023 as our final keynote speaker, summing up the whole conference for us. And not insignificantly, Liz is the reason that our international conferences exist. Liz started these conferences back in the year 2000, and she has been a vital force behind organizing them ever since. We are so grateful to have this time with you today, Liz, and I'll soon turn the floor over to you. But first, just to remind everyone, as I always do, to please keep your microphone muted while you're listening. And Sally will keep an eye on the chat, and we'll save some time for questions and conversation at the end. So, Liz, the floor is yours if you'd like to share your PowerPoint presentation. We're
Thank
all
you.
ears.
Thank you.
And I think we're going to have a record number of people here today. It's lovely you could all join us.
Oh, what's it come back there for?
Yes.
Right, well, I'll say good morning to the ones who are over this side of the world, and good evening, good night, whatever it is, wherever you are. And lovely to have this opportunity to connect with you all once again. Today, I'm going to be sharing some of my research I've been doing over a period of time. And, you know, things never stay the same. And I've been doing a lot of reflecting, listening to people and changing things and hopefully strengthening my model over years now since I first started working on it. And so I just want to give a little bit of setting the context. So in this session, I'm going to speak about research I've done over about the past 35 plus years and what I've learned about the spiritual dimension. And you'll notice I didn't say spirituality, I said the spiritual dimension of being human and its impact on us as human beings, especially as we get older. This is not about retiring from life. It's about engaging in life. And now, as an octogenarian, I can claim some lived experience of the spiritual dimension and growing older from my own experience. I sometimes allow myself to stand back and ask, all that we've studied over this time, what we've taught all those years, how does it stack up now to the reality of aging, getting down the pointy end, if you like? Were we on the right track? What does it look like from the inside? And so I'm speaking to myself as well as to everybody out there this morning, this evening, whatever. You know, most of the research I've done with older people has been listening to older people, sharing of their life experiences. When I was in my 50s, I didn't feel qualified to speak for those older than myself. I didn't know what the experience could possibly be. I started listening to the stories of older people in the 1980s. At first, independent older people, and then I did a PhD with an 84-year-old woman in Baltimore in the US who had challenged me to stop playing around at the edges and get on and do some serious research. And I came back home and thought about that a lot, and I actually did follow through on her advice. But then, of course, after I'd finished my PhD, I was challenged again. A lot of my research has come from the stimulation of other people. The next one to challenge me was Christine Bryden, and some of you would know her. She was diagnosed with dementia, and she challenged me to journey with her into dementia as her spiritual guide. And she said she needed me both as a nurse who had a specialty in geriatrics and also as a priest. And we've been in contact for many, many years, more than 20 years now. What she was particularly keen about then, and just fitted into where I saw the needs, was the finding of meaning in the experience of dementia. And that was in the mid-1990s. And overall, my aim has been to make life more enriching for older people, to help them find meaning in their lives. We can't do that for other people. We can't find the meaning for other people, but we can support them and guide them and be with them in their journeys. And also, this goes for those who care for them as well. Now, I've moved a long way from where I was living for the past 11 years. Now I'm in my third year of living in Newcastle in New South Wales. And up here, I've been asked to walk journeys with people, the families of people who have dementia, and how can they best communicate with their loved ones. And so there's a joy in this, connecting with people, walking gently with them, listening for them, waiting for people to come to me with their questions. And so what have I found overall? I'm going to share with you some of that now, but do please be aware that this has been my story, a life in progress. I'm still learning and growing in my journey, physical, mental, and spiritual, is not over until I have drawn my very last breath on this earth. And so there we go. So today, to consider the person in body, mind, and spirit. Oh, is that going to? Now, okay. It's just which button I hit to get sometimes one works and sometimes another does. There are some important questions for us as we grow older. One of these, and this question doesn't go away, it's been there since the beginning of time, I think, since there were first people who were growing older. What is longer life for? And the second one, and we're not going to address all of these, but some of these things may bubble up while I'm talking this morning. Is longer life a gift? Or perhaps it's a curse for some? And the question, do you look forward to longer life and why? And importantly, how can I still find meaning even in the face of losses and uncertainties that may come with growing older? And I want to say that how we look at life, how we look at aging, and especially as we go into this fourth age of life, if you like, the stage of frailty, how we look at aging makes a difference. And, you know, some people are quite fearful of growing older. And I guess that's nothing new. And it's a question for us too, question to ask yourself, do you fear growing older? And the question, what sort of a life do I look forward to as an older person? Am I looking to close down, go into supported care of some sort? And this is becoming more and more complicated. And just as, I guess, as an aside, since I was farewelled from one university where I'd worked for more than 17 years, in my early 60s, I'd actually had tenure there. Tenure with younger people in academia, certainly in Australia, would probably never heard of tenure because that was something that you got years ago. And I had a piece of paper that said I had employment for over 20 years guaranteed until the year that I turned 65. Anyway, I got a better off when I was in my 60s, and so I left there. But at that stage, that was a time when people were expected to probably retire about 60, 65 or something. Since then, ideas of retirement have changed enormously. Now, many older people continue to work, and I'm saying in Australia, seem to have lost the structures that used to clearly define the working years from the retirement years. And there are implications. And I think of people writing way back in history. That was part of my former studies. Paul Tournier wrote on Learn to Grow Old back in the 1970s. And he was saying so many people, as soon as they retired, because they had one job for 40, 50 years or something, they retired, and within a year or so, they had died from whatever. There was a structure to this was your working life. You stayed in one job. Now you've got retirement and that's it. But things have changed. And I suspect that there have been similar changes in other Western countries and other parts of the world as well. What do these mean for older people? And before we go any further, I want to just unpack this a little bit, the terms spirituality and religion. I'm not going to give you a whole heap of definitions and things, but I want to unpack, what is this thing we're talking about, spirituality? And so if I had body, mind, and spirit, I'd have three interacting circles together. I'd have spirituality in the middle and body and soul or body and mental health on the others, on the outsides. And what I'm going to look here is specifically at spirituality, and here it's about ultimate meaning, how we mediate ultimate meaning in our lives. And so it seems to me from the data we've collected over the years and the analysis of that is that there are four main areas in which human beings mediate their spiritual dimension with others. First is, it probably is about the most important, is relationship. It's relationship or intimacy with other human beings and or with God. And I'm taking on board that all people have a spiritual dimension. Every human being has the potential for that. And I think it's the importance of our spirit that connects with the human being and connects between people and allows this sense of intimacy, and different religions you can go into, but I'm just talking about relationships and depth of relationship, which has a different quality to it when we're thinking about the spiritual. Then we have matters of creation, creativity, and environment. And the connecting feature that hovers over how spirituality is mediated is the spirit. And I've identified here two aspects of creation: the natural environment, sea, mountains, gardens, etc., and then the human imagination. For Christians look at being co-creators with God in the whole of creation. And so human imagination comes in here, and meaningful activity and work. And then this next one overlaps or arises out of the creative aspects is the arts. But there's so much in the arts that I really needed to put them separately. Music, art, poetry, drama, dance, these are so important for especially for people who have dementia. And if I had more time and another place, I have this wonderful story of a man that I got to know very well over about 3 years when I was doing chaplaincy in an aged care facility. And he never was able to speak a word in a sentence to me all that time. And I first met him in a spiritual reminiscence small group where we had the people with dementia responding to this question about music, what was important to them, about poetry and so forth. And he actually he spoke of the walrus and the carpenter from Alice Through the Looking Glass, and he couldn't string a group of words together into a sentence, but he could say the whole of this epic poem. And it was the basis of us connecting in so many different ways. And we'd established a close, deep relationship right until the day of his death. And that was special, how poetry, music, art, all of these things can bring the spiritual into deep and meaningful being for us. And then, of course, not to be forgotten is religion. And this is also a part of, so what I'm saying is religion is part of, it's the way we work out our spiritual being through formalized activities, worship, prayer, reading of sacred texts, meditation, etc., etc. And so all of these make up some of the ways in which we actually engage, or how we mediate the ultimate meaning. We're searching for ultimate meaning, and I'm going to go on to that now. I have a model which I developed out of my PhD studies and have worked on in a number of different research projects since then. And I've been thinking about this more, and I'm actually trying to make it more user-friendly so that people can understand what it's about. And I'm going to present a few slides on this. So we start off with the spiritual themes of aging. The themes of aging are the stories that were told by older people I have interviewed. And so this was, there was in-depth interviews, and it was quite free-flowing, that people were not restricted as long as it was something to do with their life meaning and the relationship and the things we've just talked about in the last slide. And so the themes come from the individual older people themselves. In my doctoral studies, it was with independent living older people. And since then, it's been with people with dementia, it's been with people with frailty, it's been with people who were in palliative care. So I've enlarged on this. But there are two parts to these themes. And so I've labelled these as A and B. A is the process of these themes of aging, what's happening as people are growing older. And so I have got there 4 spiritual themes were identified from the data of older people, and it showed that each forms a continuum. And this is quite important as we look at the aging process. And it's something which goes across cultures as well. And I've used this material in different places in Asia, and it's been used in different places in Europe as well, and other countries. But self-sufficiency, vulnerability, that's a continuum. At one end of this continuum, it's self-sufficiency. We feel absolutely in control of our lives and we're self-sufficient. We don't need anybody to help us with anything. At the other end, we are vulnerable and need care to actually continue to live. It's a continuum, and we can move across that continuum throughout our lives, but it's something which is subject to change. And I'm just saying before we came on air that even with this continuum, children sometimes, but can be quite vulnerable too. So it's not just about aging. So you can go across one side of this continuum or the other. The next one is provisional to final meaning. It's about story or narrative. And of course, story is, there's been a lot in the last few decades about story and about recording of story. And it's as happens sometimes when something is the flavour of the month. Everybody goes and does it. And then you can sort of pack it away and it's okay, that's the story done. Except that the fact is the story is changing and growing and developing, and our knowledge and understanding of who we are, our identity through our story, continues to change all the way till we die. Even if you actually have a cognitive disability such as dementia and find it difficult to express in words what's going on. And so this is another continuum, because I was persuaded by the work of Viktor Frankl in this. He talked about that as we went through life, every life experience that was in any way significant to us was put there in memory. And that was the way that you understood an event at the time. Many years later, you might come back, say it was your first job, and the things that happened with that, it might have been the start of a brilliant career, or it might have been something which went rather pear-shaped, but it was important to you at the time. And it may be that 50 years hence, you revisit that and you think, oh, look, I hadn't looked at it that way before, but now I see why that was important. And so it's revising those provisional meanings and memories to come to final meanings. And it's interesting when we've worked with people who have dementia, it's really interesting in seeing how they respond even when they have difficulty in expressing themselves in words. They can respond to meaningful things, whereas they're just completely lost if you start giving them cognitive facts to deal with. That's another conversation. Another continuum is that of relationship through to isolation. And we hunger for good relationships, effective relationships as human beings. And of course, during aging process, there are many long-term relationships that have been fundamentally important in people's lives that are lost. But this is another continuum that you, and it's harder for you to make new friendships when you're becoming frail and older. And that's important for us to remember. We often in residential care, particularly with people with dementia, we make sure they get fed and changed and all the things that are necessary to do for physical well-being, and we may have them in some leisure activities and things, but actually facilitating meeting others within the facility and making new friendships is not something that we perhaps put much attention to. And again, that's just summarising tremendously. Hope to despair. This is another continuum. So each of these is a continuum, and I'll come back to that depending how we go time-wise and the way through. But those are 4 continuums. These are not things that we just, one day we're self-sufficient, the next day we're vulnerable, that's the end of the story. It's definitely not as simple as that. But I've got down here B, outcomes. The other 2 themes that were identified from the participant stories are actually outcomes. And they're the spiritual life journey. And so we've got coming to final life meaning. And so on the process part of it, we go back to the A part. We've got on there the provisional to final meaning. This is the searching for the final meaning. And you're looking at the provisional. Well, what you see as your life meaning today would be coming to final meanings, but something significant might happen in your life next week, and then you're going to change your final meaning. And then, of course, it's what this is heart stuff. It's whatever lies at the heart, and it's what brings you hope or despair in that. And it's out of that where you respond to final meaning. And that's the individual. If the individual sees no hope and has a religion that is no help to them, this can be devastating, and they're going to respond to everything around them out of that. So the process, 4 spiritual themes plus the 2 outcomes, they make the 6 themes from the spiritual themes of aging as a continuum. And so just working on that still, I'm putting this up slightly differently. The spiritual tasks and process of aging, I've already emphasised the continuum. There are general tasks, the general sort of tasks everyone would deal with, and then there are individual responses because we are individual human beings. And I've got the A process of the themes. These come from the stories, and the A process of tasks. And so it's what you're doing, so that if you have self-sufficiency to vulnerability is the story, the task of aging is transcending the losses and disabilities. And the provisional to final meaning is the search for meaning via story, and relationship to isolation is a search for relationship, connectedness. And Corinne Trevitt and I, when we were working with people with dementia, felt that the word connectedness touched into this much more readily than just the word relationship. That need for connection did not go away in the people who have dementia, but yet we don't always address these needs for intimacy with God and or others. And hope to despair, search for hope. And the outcomes, of course, were coming to the final meanings, and that's the tasks. And I'll take you quickly to the next one, because I really want to focus largely on the aspects that affect self-sufficiency, vulnerability, frailty, self-transcendence in the rest of this session. And so if we look at this is a different way of putting these factors up. And so we've got here, this should be a three-dimensional model. This is how I had it in the first place, but I put those other newer ones in to help explain how it all works together. And I'd be interested in feedback from people as to whether that is helpful or not. But we've got the outcome ones here in the middle of this, the ultimate meaning in life, and we respond to ultimate meaning through what lies at our heart. And so self-sufficiency, vulnerability, that is part of it, and of course provisional to final meanings, Frankel's work there on that. And this next slide, I've got the arrows. This is a dynamic model, and so there are arrows that go all over the place because one thing interacts with another, and as one goes up, the other, it balances. And so the spiritual tasks of aging is a continuing process. It's a generic model. And in fact, we have done a Christian model, and a colleague had done an Islamic model, and we were working on Jewish and Buddhist and so forth. But, you know, it takes some time to get some of these things organised. So this is what it looks like. At the heart is the ultimate meaning in life. Around that is the response to ultimate meaning and the transcend losses and disabilities, to find final meanings and wisdom, to find intimacy with God and or others, and to find hope. And you see the arrows that connect right round the four themes, around the edges, and then the middle there, and they interact with each other. So again, the spiritual themes of aging continuum, and here we've got the theme which is involving around physical, mental and spiritual aspects, self-sufficiency versus vulnerability, continuum over time, or sometimes it can be a sudden change. Maybe someone gets a sudden severe disease, has a stroke or something of that nature, and it throws them rapidly into a vulnerable state. And there's modifications there of the from health, mental, physical and social influences, and spiritual responses includes secular and faith religious responses. And you'll see that there's the continuum over time. You'll see that that is influenced by the spiritual task to transcend losses and disabilities, and it can go backwards and forwards there. And so we come to the transitioning from the third to fourth age of life. And I'm guessing that probably a number of you are quite familiar with these terms, but third age virtually still still in control of everything, can do almost anything. Travel, work, sport, hobbies, joy in relationships, and many activities and things. And I've got to sign up for the beginning year with, last year I was playing table tennis and also doing Scottish country dancing. And now I've just recently had a fracture of a vertebrae that I'm not sure that I perhaps ought to be playing table tennis at the moment. I maybe need to take some expert advice. But do you know that there's sort of these things that you have to balance up? But that the third age, a lot of stuff's about control, but sometimes we don't have to be in control. But there is a question that's taking shape. Question is taking shape. What is this life all about? If we have time to pause and reflect, and of course we can get so involved in so many different things that it's hard sometimes to just stop and reflect about what our life is all about. And what projects us into the fourth age, or we could call the term for frailty. I've got a book called, what's it called? Spiritual Care in the Fourth Age of Life, I think. And I possibly should write a new one specifically on frailty, but that's another story. But changes in health and or relationship are most common, but not inevitable reasons for moving into frailty. So I'm sort of wondering at this stage when I'm going to be classified, if someone's going to be game to classify me as frail and in need of care or something. But the fourth age is not always in control. And it's interesting, I first became aware of this when older people I'd known for years, numbers of the people I had done my in-depth interviews with for my doctoral studies wanted to keep in touch. And we kept in touch for years and years. And we would go and have lunch or we'd visit or whatever. And it got to the stage where numbers of them would apologise and need to cancel lunch or whatever activity that they were meeting with me for, maybe at quite short notice. And often they would say to me, life is becoming more precarious. And so this was a sense that they had. And I deliberately put that shot of a gum tree clinging to the side of cliffs down at the beach, actually, where I used to live. And it possibly was a beautiful young sapling at one stage that was growing straight and full of beautiful leaves and just very proud to be itself. And of course, it's been hanging on there for a long time with very little nourishment, with its roots just hanging into crevices in the rocks, and it's twisted and gnarled. But it's still something of beauty, you know. And I think this life is becoming more precarious, but it doesn't mean the end of it. And it doesn't necessarily mean the quality of it is off. So I wanted to share with you now some of the, now can I get rid of, I'll just get rid of those for the moment. A few very well-known people have said some very significant things about their frailty and how they were going. This first one I put in here is about finding meaning in the final life career. And in case you're not familiar with that term, that's the journey towards death. And I'm not putting any framework on how long that takes. It's very individual. But Oliver Sacks, a renowned neurologist, he wrote some amazing books. And one of his books had a fascinating title, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Yeah, but Oliver Sacks, just before he died, he wrote in the New York Times of his forthcoming death, and he died within months of writing that. And I think this says something really important about where we're going and how we might see our earthly ending, if you like. And to me, this was beautiful. Over the last few days, I have been able to see my life as from a great altitude, as a sort of landscape, and with a deepening sense of the connection of all its parts. This does not mean I'm finished with life. On the contrary, I feel intensely alive, and I want and hope in the time that remains to deepen my friendships, to say farewell to those I love, to write more, to travel if I have the strength, to achieve new levels of understanding and insight. And, that's the kind of place I'd like to be when I get there. And going on a bit more, this is important, and this is particularly Frankl stuff, the need to find meaning in each and every situation of life. And he says that and I'll come back to this a little later too, that no matter what life throws at us, it's our attitudes towards it that is so important. And the first aspect of this is a key to transcendence is meaning, finding meaning. And Frankl, in his personal experiences in the concentration camps of the Second World War, he wrote that meaning is not lost in the face of trauma or deprivation. And at the time, he wrote this after he'd come out of the concentration camp, and it's very significant. There was an epidemic of typhus in the camp, and of course, as a doctor, he was involved, although he was a prisoner there too, he was involved in caring for people, and he caught typhus, and he was at a very low ebb, and he reported feeling that he was going to die. And then he realized that what he had learned, not his academic work before he went into the concentration camp, where he'd been a researcher in medicine, but his experiences of humanity in the concentration camps was too important to let it go. And he suddenly realized that he couldn't die at this point. And there he was. And so he changed his whole attitude rather than seeing typhus as the thing that would carry him off. And he recovered to have a new family and write his books, many books actually, after the war. People need to be able to find meaning in these and any other circumstances of life. It's just not all about party times. It's about how do we deal with the things that are quite horrific sometimes and come out the other side. And for some of you, he was not quite sure how you describe Clive James. He was certainly a well-known artist of different ilks and performed on television and lots of things. And he was older and dying of leukemia and another cancer. And in a TV interview, which was very good, he he died in 2019, said, "My decline has been the making of me." And he was referring to the the decisions that happened in his marriage and one thing and another. But he'd come to a decision that he knew where he was going now and wherever that was, and that he turned his life around in his dying again. And I just wanted to put a little bit of explanation down there, and I'm sure that Sally will be interested in this little one, transcendence. Joan Erickson, writing in the Life Circle Complete in 1997, called it, this is the new 9th stage of the psychosocial ages, the Erickson stages of development, psychosocial development. And she called this transcendence. And you get the meaning of that. And of course, this is the concept developed by Lars Tornstam on gerotranscendence. So one more of these about the themes, self-sufficiency versus vulnerability, and how I think it works. Now, I could be proved wrong. You know, this is part of the development of knowledge and understanding of humanity. But this is what I think anyway. Increasing frailty can be due to increased disability, losses, multiple chronic conditions, lower energy, spiritual tasks, is to transcend the losses and disabilities. But if you look across here, you'll see that I have put in here a little blue box, which says choice is the attitudes towards frailty. And the choice of how we respond to oncoming frailty is critically important as to how well we will do, our attitudes. And basically, at two extremes, we have two possibilities. One is to embrace frailty, and we have the possibility of stimulating spiritual growth in this, or the other is to deny frailty. And that, of course, blocks the inner strength. And I'm just looking for, I've got some stuff to talk about on that. And you will notice then we've got the theme up the top in green, the self-sufficiency versus vulnerability. We've got the spiritual task to transcend losses and disabilities. And you can see that that's influenced by our attitudes. And the thing about choice is that unfortunately, often people do not realize that they have a choice. And again, Frankl is critically important in understanding this. As he said, it's even going to face torture. You have a choice in which you can decide how you are going to face that horrific situation. And that choice that you have made from within your heart is going to be important to the outcome. You might want to think about that. And then you'll see, if we go back to the other side, you'll see here we've got humour and laughter coming in on the side. And it's interesting that humour and laughter actually are both resultant and factors within the process of transcending losses and disabilities. And often people, and I've just found, and the others who've researched with me have found, particularly with people with dementia, that sometimes there'll be a lot of black humour out there, and that they will be laughing about dying and terrible things that have happened. And it's part of this whole process of transcendence. Outcomes again. So we've got process and we've got outcomes. Outcomes, finding meaning leads to inner strength, and inner strength produces hope, love, peace, and joy, and increases the likelihood that the person will be able to face any particular circumstance in life. And importantly, this is not about the psychological construct of coping. This is a meta change that is brought about by this transcendence process that occurs. And so, inner strength. Do we understand each other? Inner strength. This is a term that frail older people have used in the frailty research, and they've used this in everyday conversation. And you need to be a little bit careful when you're doing research to know whether and how the person you're working with understands the words you use. If you're using spirituality for inner strength, people have different understandings of that, and the outcomes you get may not be really what's going on. So it's so important that we're on the same page. And it's interesting that this is not a new term. It's been used and understood, I've said, for more than 1,000 years, well, 2,000 years. What's, 1,000 years one way or another? It's used by Paul in his letter to the Ephesians, in his prayer for them. He prayed to God that he may grant that you may be strengthened in your inner being with power through his Spirit. And so that's what these people who maybe don't even know a God exists are finding, an inner strength within their being. And so that's something also to think about, and how we might tap into that. And actually, I'll just go back if I, oh no, I've gone on too far. How do I go back? Look, we'll just stay, oh no, it did go back. It's all right now. Let's go with inner strength. I've got some examples here from our research that I just wanted to share with you. And one of the participants we had, and these are all pseudonyms, Yvonne. She was one who struggled as she's become frailer. And I asked her, now at this time she has emphysema, all the things that are happening to you, what gives you the strength to keep going day by day? And Yvonne says, well, honestly, and these are recorded verbatim, I don't know, I really don't, because each day I think to myself, I wish to goodness I could go to sleep, because I've got no life. I've got no quality of life. I mean, it's a matter of, to me, it's monotonous. Get out of bed in the morning, have your breakfast, have your meals during the day, go back to bed, go back to sleep. It's the same old, day after day. That's not life. I mean, I can't get out now to go out and do a bit of shopping and things like that, which I miss. And this Yvonne had been part of a very active social group with regular participation and activities at the local club, which she greatly missed, along with not being able to go shopping or not being able to smoke cigarettes. And she characterised herself as a doer. Life was now hard for her, especially with her chronic lung disease and its effects on decreasing her energy levels and any physical activity. She did not wish to be involved in any social or religious activities in residential care. She struggled even to hold a conversation with one other person. And it was extremely difficult in the interview to actually hear the words she was speaking because of her extreme breathlessness. She died a couple of months after our interview. Another one, Joan, didn't seem to understand that I was not talking about physical strength, and she related all her interview to that. Helen demonstrated resilience and quiet strength as she reflected on how she'd overcome past difficulties in her life. So, inner strength, it's not the same for everybody, and it's something that we can certainly help others with. But also thinking of our own aging, and we may not be anywhere near this stage yet, but it's worth thinking about where is it that we get our inner strength from, and what do we want to do with the rest of our lives? And so I want to just finish by talking about the unique inheritance across generations and the possibility of legacy for our children and grandchildren. And I'm not talking about physical legacies here. And I just want to context this. Life goes by so rapidly, we rarely, it seems, pause to think of the wonder of birth, life, and death. The whole of the life cycle has become overtaken by science and medicine. We may even feel that we can have little relationship with our grandchildren. We may lose sight of the wonder of the babies born to us. They grow up so fast. Of our children's children and the inheritance that passes through our genes from generation to generation. This life cycle is, in essence, a sacred cycle. Each child is born with this wonderful inheritance and potential, the spark of life, the human spirit that each child has. As we grow older, we may be struck at times when we see some of our own physical, mental, or even spiritual characteristics displayed in our children and grandchildren. Each of us has our own unique being in this world, body, mind, and spirit. Perhaps questions for each of us as we reflect on our own aging and the opportunities we have and the choices we might make. They're open. So questions, what kind of a relationship can we have in this fast and furious world with our grandchildren? What can we leave or give to those who would come after us? And for a moment, and I think this will have to be after this session, right, way after, because we're running out of time. For a moment, think about what you would want as a spiritual legacy for your children, grandchildren, and those who you love. What is a spiritual legacy? And note it's a spiritual legacy, and you may have not thought of that before. Spiritual legacy you'd like to give to those who come after you can be broad as the whole of the spiritual dimension. And there's a suggested, where you might go with this. It's way, really wide. And just to finish, there's some further reading there. So I think we're out of time, and thank you very much. And I'm sure Sally's got a whole lot of stuff in the chat box or something there. So over to the
Thank
crew.
you. Thank you, Liz. Now, before we go, don't leave just yet, because thank you, Liz. Such a rich presentation. We are going to extend a little bit today. We are going to go for a bit longer to be able to ask Liz some questions and share the comments, if that's okay with you, Liz. And if you wanted to go back to the parenting slide and unpack that more, you've plenty of time if you'd like to do that. So everybody, you're all welcome to stay on. But if you can't, you'll be able to hear it on the recording, which we send out to everybody who has been registered. So Liz, if you've got a bit more time, are you happy for us to launch into a few comments and questions? Lovely. I'm going to take them in the order with which they came, if that is all right with you there. Sarah Jo proposed that right back on your original model, that the relationship or felt intimacy with others or with God or the divine, it can also be important to have that intimacy and relationship with more than just human beings, with other creatures or beings as well, or with Earth herself. So as I speak, the dog is sitting under the desk today, listening in to us. So that relationship with others. Would you care to comment on that as well?
Well, actually, it's interesting, that one. I don't know that we can go back to, we've gone to the end of that. I think that relationship with others comes in the co-creators and environment section, because that's all about the whole of creation. And I had another example, but I was running out of time. One of the women who I interviewed, who was in well, it wasn't it was supported care in residential care. And she had been a keen gardener, and she actually, I'm not sure, coerced, faucet every little plant and thing that was going anywhere in the district so that she could have them in. She had a tiny little balcony off her room, and her relationship even with those plants was just so important to her. And you could see her energy rising as she spoke about those, look at this, so-and-so gave that to me, and, and then she'd tell the story about it. And so everything living has got a place in this. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Megan asked, do you feel that there is a difference between a fear of becoming disabled and a fear of aging?
I think they can become very complicated together. There can be a sort of general fear of aging, and some people, they won't even tell you how old they are, because we don't want to go there. And I say I'm an octogenarian because I like the sound of the word. But I'm halfway through my octogenarian, so I have to think about something else depending how much time I've got left. But I think they can amplify each other. So, yeah.
So in a way, some of the fear of aging might be the fear of that frailty of becoming disabled.
Yes,
and even vice versa.
And a lot of people will say, if I ask the question, do you look forward to being older? And they'll say, yes, but as long as I'm healthy. And I think, that in a couple of those ones, the Oliver Sacks and the Frankor ones in particular that I gave as examples, were people who obviously were not showing signs of fear because they had something bigger that they were hanging on to.
Okay, so they had meaning that they were actually going to. We've had a lot of discussion in the chat about transcendence and the transcendence. Pardon me.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I'm wondering if you might be able to very briefly explain what you mean by transcend, because it's one of those spiritual tasks. We need to transcend our losses and disabilities. Jennifer was wondering about the term, in that perhaps at times we also incorporate our losses and disabilities rather than transcend them. Transcending seems to give a sense of leaving them behind, at least along the way of aging, not at the very end. So wondering what do you mean by transcend?
Okay. Perhaps I might add in another word there,
Sure.
transformation, which I
Okay.
didn't use in this presentation, but I do sometimes use. And that's more of a Christian term, I think.
Sure.
Transformation means that we are renewed and we're growing and coming to a new place. And part of this also comes through from Tornstam's work too, talking about transformation, so that it can be seen in a secular as well as a theological perspective. But it's being able to look beyond the self to be aware of others, and that's very strong in Frankl's work too, that we can be engrossed in our own disabilities. And I think sometimes I've come across people who are in the healthcare professions who've got this message that we mustn't talk about physical problems to people in aged care. And if they start to talk about their physical problems, you cut them off because they're supposed to be happy. But you need to deal with problems. So it's how you actually negotiate this, and people will find all sorts of different ways where they can actually use their energies and their strength to more positive ways of being, rather than focusing on their losses and disabilities, whereas others will continue to focus on the losses and disabilities. So it's not a Pollyanna thing. It's struggle. It's part of this looking at your story too, because the story, there are linkages between that story and your understanding of who you are as a human being and what you want to do, and the transcendence, or that term transformation, that you are growing spiritually and becoming a new person as you move along the lifespan.
So in a way, it's not leaving it behind, but it is that incorporation, but it's also that, where is your focus? What are you choosing to focus on? Are you focusing on that negativity or that disability or the losses? Are you focusing on, what does this mean? And, how can I embrace?
Yeah. And this is the difference too between coping and the spiritual transformation, because the spiritual transformation takes you to a new place, which is, it becomes enduring, whereas coping is something which is a mechanism that you use to get over this or to get over that, and you don't want to think about it anymore, but it's task specific much more, I think.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Which actually leads to what Lois actually popped into the chat, which is, I wonder how often our choices to embrace or deny our increasing frailty is influenced by the people we have seen who are modelling either embracing or denying.
Yes. Actually, that's a really important one. They're all important. But, I find myself influenced by some of the people I've looked after at different stages in my career. And you see some of these people and their experiences, and you think, maybe that could be me. Maybe, and they've had a bad outcome, and you can allow yourself to be, brought into this internal conversation that you're having, and you can self-talk yourself into the fact that things are going to turn out badly. And I think it's good for us to be able to have healthy conversations with others. And sometimes in relationship isolation, this can be a problem for people that they don't have anyone to share with, because I think we need to be able to have that social interaction as well as the spiritual interaction. But really important questions.
Absolutely. Being present. And I think somebody popped that into the chat as well, that being present with somebody can give that opportunity just to be there. Natan put into the chat, which also relates, it seems to me that humour and laughter may be both resultant and supportive of engagement in the spiritual tasks over time. Would you agree with that, Liz?
Yeah, well, that's what I said.
Exactly. Exactly. So, yes, it can either be resultant or supportive. That's exactly right.
You want a little bit more explanation about that. I think that when you're absolutely overwhelmed by something and somebody comes up with a joke or something, you really don't feel like, you tell them what to do with themselves. But if you're able to laugh at yourself, and of course this is where Freud's work comes in too, that this lessens the responses, and so there is this movement between that laughter and humour, and it's humour is used certainly to reduce stress and to release and laughter, of course, as they say, is good for you because it's coming in, and so yes, and of course it tends to become a really positive cycle if you can keep laughing at yourself. And I've noticed that quite a number of people in our studies who have dementia, as I mentioned, come up with this really black humour, and they'll talk about it and dying quite a bit, and they'll laugh about it. And this is, and I think
it's actually quite healthy to do that. Yes.
And I think sometimes carers who are not at that stage in life may think, oh, this is a bit, and not feel comfortable with what they're hearing.
Exactly. Anita has asked for some good resources for the ways we can help people understand that they do have a choice in their attitude to frailty and to support meaning. And Anita, I'll just say, read any of Elizabeth's books, as well as Viktor Frankl. But Anita, we will pop out a list of resources for you when we send out this recording, and everything that's been in the chat as well. So, Liz, would you say anything particular there? Good resources to help people understand they do have a choice in their attitude.
I probably, it's about time I wrote another book, I suppose.
And just a couple more small things. You were speaking in terms of continuums rather than cliff edges in ageing. So this is from Keith Albans. Hello, Keith. Can you say a little bit more about the hope to despair continuum, please? Is despair the right word?
Now, well, actually, I nearly said, because one of the other thing is hope, fear is another way I would express that. And I think it's positive versus negative. And but it is a continuum. But hope is an interesting one, because I think I put it in there as the 4 continuums on the process of spiritual growth, development. So you've got self-sufficiency versus vulnerability. You've got the provisional to final meanings. You've got the relationship versus isolation and the hope fear. In fact, with all the arrows that I had around the outside, most of these, the feedback comes to the hope one from the other one, from the self-sufficiency versus vulnerability, the story where it's at and the person's self-understanding of that, and the relationship one. And that feeds into hope. And out of that comes peace, hope, joy, and so forth. And yeah, I'd look at that every time I do it, and I think, should I put hope, despair, or hope, fear? And I mean, fear's the big thing that comes in there, and I put despair this time. But there you go.
There we go.
Yeah.
Terrific.
But I think it's really, really important that we look at these as being continuums. They're not things that have a start and finish date. And it's not a one size fits all. And there are so many variables, I think, that's important.
Yes.
And this is why we have to listen to stories, and why we have to meet people where they are, and perhaps ask those questions of them. Are they seeing what is choice for them? And you know, and this is pastoral presence that's coming in here as we journey with people.
And as you were saying before, Elizabeth, the continuums aren't necessarily just one-way continuums either. There can be some back and forthing.
Yep. And that's the beauty of the continuum. You can be anywhere along that, and next week you can be somewhere else. It moves. It's not static. It's a dynamic model.
Wonderful. Last couple of things. Would you like to expand at all on grandparenting, particularly has your own experience of being a grandparent of teenagers now? Has that changed your ideas and your focus around legacy?
Yes and no. I became involved in the national grandparenting movement in Australia last year when I was invited to speak, and it made me very much more conscious of that. And I discovered when I went to the conference that they had an enormous crowd of people present, plus another online presence from around the world. It's inviting, it's tapping into a new audience of people who are the younger grandparents, who are not elderly, but have a tremendous energy and ability to give of themselves and to empower others. And they're saying about spiritual legacy. And this surely is important, as you know, because I've always wanted to provide some financial support for my grandchildren as I was able. And I think that's been a feel-good thing to do. Unfortunately, I don't have, from that point of view, don't have a lot of grandchildren. Therefore, I could, but if you had a large family, it could be rather difficult. But it's, I see these kids growing up. Mine are now 12, 14, and 17, and they're treasures. And they're flowers that are beginning to come into blossom and changing. And it's, to me, and my move from 7 hours drive away down the coast to living in a big city again, it's given me a chance to be closer to my family and see more of the process. I do miss the sea breezes and the lovely place down there. However, I think that was for a time at a season. I'm in another time at a season now, and And I'm pleased that I moved and was able to be part of that. And I've got my L's on too, because I was never close to my grandchildren when they were tiny. And there are a lot of things I think you miss when and they grow up so quickly, and they're treasures. Yeah.
I do like that expression, there is a time and a season, and maybe that's one way we can look at that transcendence. Well, there was a time and a season, and that season's finished, and another time doesn't mean that season might not come again in a different way. Or seasons of life. Thank you, Mavis. And finally, right early on, very early on in your presentation, you asked, how do we learn to grow old? Because here we are in Western society, we are trained to avoid being old. Our media portrayal of older people is dreadful. We're all pushed with anti-aging products for our skins, and we're encouraged to feel good if someone assumes we're younger than we may look. So how do we learn to grow old?
Well, I think maybe we should all read Paul Tournier's book that was written in the 1970s. And I just found that just this week when I was putting together the final touches of this, and I did give him a mention, he really was very forward thinking, and he was actually advocating, and I must read it more carefully again. It's a really easy read. And for the 1970s, he was a medical doctor who also had a great interest and studied a lot in pastoral care as well, and pastoral studies. And he's written some really good stuff on all of that. But he was saying that we have to, and this is back in the 70s, and have we listened or learned? We've got to stop separating out people who are older from the rest of the population. And we still do it. We still segregate people. And I mean, you know, there is a lot of ageism out there, and I don't think it's getting any better. You know, occasionally I'll come over across a lovely young tradesman, a plumber or someone who is just so respectful and is so helpful about my needs for my house. And, you know, I really treasure that. But there's a lot out there that's, you know, so, you know, I don't know that we need to recreate the wheel. I think sometimes we need to look at what people have already written for us, but because it's not 2026 that it was written, we want to discount it. And I think that that's very sad.
Exactly. And thank you to Keith, who's popped in another resource into the chat, and we'll be sending all of that out as well.
Have a look at all these
Liz,
things as they come up.
Terrific. Thank you so, so much. And thank you for giving us extra time today. And Jane, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Yes, all I have to say is a final thank you as well. Thank you to everyone for joining us and for hanging on even longer to continue the conversation. And thank you so much to Liz for freely offering your time, your wisdom, your presence here with us. It's been wonderful to have this time with you. And just a reminder to everyone that we have more webinars coming up, and you can go to grable.ca/SA to register for them, and you'll be hearing from me as well to remind you about that. So go well and be blessed all.